He came to show her she had been left behind. He didn't expect to find out she had already moved on. The doorbell rang just as Claire gently rocked the baby against her shoulder, the late afternoon light spilling through thin curtains and catching the soft rise and fall of his tiny chest. And for a second she thought about not answering, about letting the moment stay quiet and untouched. But the bell rang again, sharper this time, and when she opened the door, there he was, Ethan Cole, standing tall in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, with Vanessa Hale beside him in a cream dress and a smile polished to perfection, the kind of smile meant to be seen, not felt, and in her hand, a thick ivory envelope sealed with gold lettering that gleamed like a trophy. And Ethan didn't look surprised to see Claire, not at first, his expression carrying that calm, controlled confidence of a man who believed he understood exactly how this moment would go, like he had rehearsed it, like he had already imagined her reaction, the slight flinch, the quiet hurt, maybe even a trace of regret. But then his eyes dropped, just for a fraction of a second, to the baby in Claire's arms, and something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, just a small crack beneath the surface, the kind you wouldn't notice unless you were watching closely. And Claire didn't move, didn't explain. She simply adjusted the soft cotton blanket wrapped around the baby, tucking it gently under his chin, her fingers steady, her breathing even, as if nothing about this moment was unusual, as if the past standing on her doorstep had no authority here anymore. Vanessa stepped forward first, extending the envelope with a practiced warmth, her voice light and bright as she spoke about the wedding, about how they thought it would be nice for Claire to come, as if kindness could be packaged and handed over like an invitation. But Ethan wasn't listening anymore, his gaze lingering too long on the child, tracing features he couldn't quite place yet couldn't ignore. And the hallway seemed to narrow, the air tightening in a way no one acknowledged out loud. Claire finally looked up at him, her expression calm, unreadable, not cold, not welcoming, just present, grounded, and entirely untouched by whatever version of her he had expected to find. And in that quiet, suspended moment, it became clear that whatever story Ethan had come to tell, whatever ending he thought he was delivering, had already changed the second she opened that door with a child in her arms. Vanessa stepped inside, without waiting for permission, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor as she glanced around the apartment with a careful, almost rehearsed curiosity, taking in the small sofa, the neatly folded baby blanket draped over the armrest, the faint scent of warm milk lingering in the air. And there was something in the way she tilted her head, like she was measuring the space against an invisible standard and finding it lacking, while Ethan remained near the doorway, quieter now, his attention drifting again and again back to the baby, as if something about the child refused to let him fully return to the version of himself he had brought here. Vanessa finally turned back with a gentle smile that did not quite reach her eyes and said they had been busy planning everything, that the venue overlooked the ocean, that the guest list was exclusive, that it would be beautiful, her voice smooth and controlled, each word placed carefully like pieces in a display. And she extended the invitation again, closer this time, as if proximity alone could make the moment feel genuine. Claire shifted her weight slightly, the baby stirring softly against her shoulder, a small hand curling instinctively into the fabric of her shirt, and she glanced down for just a second, her expression softening in a way that had nothing to do with the people standing in front of her, before she looked back up, steady, composed, and entirely unbothered by the picture Vanessa was trying to paint. Ethan cleared his throat as if to reclaim the direction of the conversation, saying they thought it would be right for her to come, that it was a way to close things properly, his tone measured, almost polite. But there was something underneath it now, something uncertain, as though he could feel the moment slipping away from his control. Claire did not reach for the invitation. She did not ask questions. She did not comment on the ocean view or the guest list. Instead, she gently adjusted the baby's position, supporting his head with practiced ease, her movements quiet and precise, and the absence of reaction seemed to stretch the room wider than any words could. Vanessa's smile tightened just slightly, her fingers lingering in the air a moment too long before lowering, and she let out a soft laugh that felt just a little forced, saying it must be overwhelming. Everything Claire had going on, her gaze flicking again toward the baby with a curiosity that was beginning to edge into something sharper, something less kind. Ethan followed that gaze, and this time he did not look away quickly, his eyes tracing the small features again, slower now, more deliberate, as if trying to solve a puzzle that had appeared without warning. And Claire noticed. Of course she noticed, but she said nothing, because she did not need to guide him to the truth. The silence was already doing that work for her, and somewhere in that quiet, in the space between what was said and what was left unsaid, the balance of the room had already begun to shift, even if none of them were ready to admit it out loud. Vanessa's patience began to thin in ways she could not fully disguise, her fingers brushing invisible dust from the edge of the table as her eyes moved again to the baby. This time not with curiosity, but with calculation, and she asked lightly, almost playfully, how old he was, as if it were a harmless question meant to fill the silence. But the room seemed to hold its breath before Claire answered, and when she did, her voice was soft, steady, giving nothing away except the number, a simple number that landed heavier than anything else that had been said since the door opened. Ethan's head lifted slightly, his brow tightening as the timeline began to rearrange itself in his mind without permission. 6 months since the divorce, and the age of the child. The months folding over each other until they no longer made sense the way he wanted them to. And for the first time since he arrived, he looked unsettled, not outwardly dramatic, just a subtle shift, the kind that shows in the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his jaw paused before tightening again. Vanessa noticed immediately, her gaze snapping toward him, searching his expression, then back to Claire, and something sharper entered her tone as she repeated the question, slower. This time, as if clarity might change the answer. But Claire did not elaborate. She did not rush to explain or defend. She simply adjusted the baby's blanket again, smoothing it over his small chest with the same quiet care, as if the entire conversation happening around her had no authority over what mattered. Ethan finally spoke, asking the question that had already begun forming the moment the number left Claire's lips. His voice lower now, stripped of the earlier confidence, and he asked if the baby was hers, and Claire met his eyes directly, not with defiance, not with challenge, but with a calm certainty that made the question itself feel almost unnecessary. And she said yes, just that, nothing more, and the simplicity of it left no space for interpretation. Ethan inhaled slowly, as if trying to steady something inside himself that had started to tilt, his eyes returning to the baby again, longer this time, tracing the curve of his cheek, the shape of his nose, the quiet way he slept without knowing, the storm gathering just a few feet away. And memory began to press in, moments he had not thought about in months, timelines he had ignored, choices he had justified, all rising now with an uncomfortable clarity. Vanessa stepped closer, her voice no longer light, asking what exactly that meant, her words edged with something that was no longer polite. And Claire finally shifted her gaze toward her, still composed, still grounded, and in that steady silence, it became clear that whatever answers Vanessa was looking for would not be handed to her easily, because Claire was not there to explain her life, she was there simply living it. And the more she refused to fill the silence, the louder it became, until even Ethan could not pretend he did not understand what it was trying to tell him. The silence did not break, it stretched, thin and sharp, until it began to pull something loose from the past that none of them had planned to revisit. And for Claire, the room around her seemed to fade just slightly as memory pressed forward, not as a flood, but in fragments, quiet and precise, like scenes she had already packed away, but never truly erased. She remembered the kitchen in their old house, the one with the wide counter where she used to leave his dinner covered, waiting long past the time it should have been eaten. She remembered the sound of the front door opening late at night, the way Ethan would loosen his tie without looking at her, his attention always somewhere else, somewhere she was no longer invited to follow. She remembered asking simple questions that were met with tired sighs, being told she was overthinking, being told everything was fine when everything had already started to slip. And the more she tried to hold on, the quieter she became, shrinking her needs, adjusting her expectations, until the marriage felt less like a partnership and more like a space she was slowly being edged out of. And then there was the day the truth stopped pretending to hide, not in a dramatic confession, but in the small, undeniable shift of his presence. The way his phone would light up and he would turn it away. The way his attention sharpened for someone else while dulling completely for her. Vanessa had not entered their lives. Like a storm, she had entered like a replacement already prepared, already waiting. And by the time Claire realized it, the decision had already been made without her. The divorce papers had come with calm explanations, with logic, with a tone that made it sound reasonable, inevitable, as if ending a marriage was simply the next step in a plan she had never been part of. And Ethan had stood there that day with the same composed expression he wore now, explaining that it was better this way, that they had grown apart, that it was time to move forward. And Claire had listened, not because she agreed, but because she understood something he did not, that once a person has already left you in their mind, there is no argument that can bring them back. And so she had signed, quietly, without begging, without asking him to stay, because somewhere beneath the hurt, there was a clarity she could not ignore, that holding on to someone who had already chosen another path would only break her further. And now, standing in her small apartment with her child resting against her shoulder, she could see that version of Ethan again, the man who had once believed he was walking away clean, leaving behind something finished, something that would remain exactly as he left it. But the room he stood in now was not the one he remembered, and the woman in front of him was not the one who had signed those papers in silence. Because the difference was not loud, it was not announced, it was simply there, in the way she stood, in the way she did not reach for him, in the way her world no longer paused for his presence. And for the first time, it became clear that the ending he had written for her had never actually happened. The days after the divorce did not arrive with clarity or relief. They came in small, quiet pieces that Claire had to learn how to carry on her own. Mornings that began before the sun rose because the baby needed to be fed. Nights that stretched longer than they should because sleep never came easily when responsibility did not pause. And there was no one to share the weight with. No one to notice the effort it took just to keep everything steady. She remembered sitting at the edge of her bed one early morning, the room dim except for the soft glow of a lamp, holding the test result in her hand and realizing that the life she thought had ended was, in fact, beginning again in a way she had not planned. And there had been a moment, brief but real, where fear tried to take over, where the future felt too uncertain to hold. But it passed, not because the situation became easier, but because she made a decision not to run from it. She chose to stay, to build, to face every appointment, every bill, every quiet night, with a kind of determination that did not need to be seen to be real. She learned the rhythm of grocery lists measured down to the dollar, of folding tiny clothes that seemed impossibly small, of timing everything around the steady needs of a child who depended on her completely. And in those routines, something inside her began to settle, not perfectly, not all at once, but enough to move forward, enough to stand on her own without looking back. And now, standing in the same room she had built piece by piece, Claire did not feel the need to explain any of it to the two people in front of her, because none of what she had endured required their understanding to be valid. Ethan shifted again, his posture no longer relaxed, his confidence no longer intact, as if the weight of what he was beginning to realize had started to press into him from all sides. His eyes moving around the apartment, taking in the details he had ignored at first, the baby bottles neatly lined up on the counter, the stack of folded blankets, the quiet order of a life that had been rebuilt without him. And it unsettled him in a way he could not easily mask, because this was not the version of Claire he had expected to find. Not the one who would still be waiting, still be hurting, still be tied to a past he believed he had already closed. Vanessa crossed her arms, her expression tightening as the atmosphere shifted further away from what she had anticipated, her voice sharper now as she asked how Claire managed everything on her own, the question sounding less like curiosity and more like disbelief. But Claire did not respond with a list of struggles or victories. She simply met her gaze with the same quiet steadiness she had held from the beginning. Because the answer was already there, in the room, in the life she had built, in the child she held. And the more she refused to justify herself, the more it became clear that she no longer needed anyone else to confirm that she had survived, and more importantly, that she had moved beyond the place they had once left her behind. Ethan finally spoke again. But this time, there was no trace of the polished confidence he had walked in with. his voice lower, slower, as if each word had to pass through something heavier before reaching the air, and he asked how old the baby was again, not because he had not heard the answer, but because he needed to hear it one more time, needed to confirm what his mind was already starting to piece together. Claire did not hesitate. She repeated the number just as calmly as before, and that was when the silence changed shape, no longer just tense, but weighted. Final, like something had quietly locked into place. Ethan's gaze dropped once more to the child, but this time it was different, no longer curious, no longer distant, but searching, almost unwillingly drawn in by details he could not ignore. The small curve of the baby's mouth, the faint crease near his eyes, the subtle familiarity that did not ask for permission before settling in his chest, and his breath slowed, then caught, just slightly, enough for Vanessa to notice, her expression tightening as she stepped closer to him, asking what was wrong, her tone edged now with impatience rather than charm. But Ethan did not answer her immediately, because the timeline had already begun to rewrite itself in his mind. 6 months since. The divorce, the months before that, the last conversations, the last time he had stood in a room with Claire and believed everything was already finished, and now those memories felt incomplete, like pages missing from a story he had assumed he understood. Claire shifted the baby gently as he stirred, her hand steady against his back, her focus entirely on keeping him calm, and that quiet, instinctive care only made the contrast sharper, because there was nothing in her movements that asked for recognition, nothing that reached outward for validation, and yet everything about it spoke louder than any explanation she could have given. Ethan swallowed, his hand brushing briefly against the edge of the doorframe, as if grounding himself, and when he finally looked up at Claire again, there was something new in his eyes, something unsettled, something that had not been there when he arrived, a question forming that he was not sure he wanted answered, but could no longer avoid. Vanessa's voice cut in again, sharper now, pressing for clarity, asking directly what all of this meant, her gaze moving between them with growing suspicion. But Claire did not fill the space with words. She did not rush to clarify or defend. She simply met Ethan's eyes for a brief moment, and in that glance there was no accusation, no anger, just a quiet acknowledgement that whatever he was beginning to understand was entirely his to face. And that was what made it heavier, because there was no argument to push against, no emotion to dismiss, only the slow, undeniable realization settling into place. And as Ethan stood there, the invitation in Vanessa's hand forgotten, the carefully planned visit unraveling without warning, it became clear that the moment he thought he was controlling had already slipped beyond him, and whatever came next would not be something he could shape or undo. Vanessa's composure finally cracked, not all at once, but in small, sharp edges that began to show through her voice, and she stepped forward with a tight smile that no longer bothered to hide its strain, asking Claire directly if there was something they were supposed to understand, her tone no longer polite, no longer patient, and the question hung in the air like a demand rather than a request. But Claire did not rush to answer. She simply shifted the baby slightly as he stirred again, her hand moving in a slow, familiar rhythm against his back, grounding him, calming him, and in doing so, she seemed entirely untouched by the tension building around her, which only made it worse, because Vanessa had come expecting discomfort, expecting weakness, expecting something she could stand above, but instead she found herself reacting, pushing, trying to force a moment that refused to give her anything to control. Ethan finally moved, not toward Vanessa, but slightly away, as if instinctively, creating distance from the rising sharpness in her voice. His attention still caught between Claire and the child, and when he spoke, it was not to defend Vanessa or to continue the performance they had arrived with, but to ask another question, quieter this time, more careful, asking when exactly Claire had found out. And Claire looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he stepped through the doorway. And there was no anger in her gaze, no attempt to accuse, just a calm recognition of what he was trying to piece together too late. And she answered simply, telling him it was after everything had already ended, after the papers were signed, after he had already walked away without looking back, and the words did not rise, did not sharpen. They stayed soft, steady, but they carried more weight than any confrontation could have, because they left no room for misunderstanding, Vanessa let out a short, disbelieving breath, her arms crossing tighter as she looked. Between them, her expression shifting from irritation to something closer to alarm, as if the ground beneath the situation had changed in a way she could not control, and she tried to pull the moment back by dismissing it, suggesting it was all just unfortunate timing, just something that happened. But Ethan did not respond. He did not agree. He did not move closer to her. Instead, he stood there, absorbing the quiet reality unfolding in front of him. The realization that while he had been planning a future, there had been a life forming that he never even considered, and the weight of that understanding began to settle deeper, visible now in the way his shoulders no longer held that easy confidence, in the way his gaze no longer wandered but stayed fixed, anchored to the child who represented something he could not rewrite. Vanessa spoke again, sharper, pressing him, asking if he was actually taking this seriously, but Ethan's silence answered more than any words could, and in that silence, the balance between them shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably, because for the first time, he was no longer standing beside her. He was standing somewhere in between, caught between what he had chosen and what he had unknowingly left behind. And Claire did not step into that space. She did not claim it. She simply remained where she was, steady, composed, holding her child, allowing the truth to settle on its own without needing her to push it any further. The tension in the room had not broken. It had only settled deeper, like something waiting just beneath the surface. And then a quiet sound from the hallway shifted everything. The soft turn of a key, the measured step of someone approaching. And before anyone inside could react, the door, still slightly open, moved just enough to reveal a man standing there with a small paper bag in one hand and a calm, unhurried presence that did not match the strain filling the apartment. Adrian Bennett paused for a brief second when he saw the unexpected company, his eyes taking in Ethan and Vanessa without confusion, without curiosity, just a quiet acknowledgement, as if their presence did not require explanation to him. And then his attention moved naturally to Claire, to the baby in her arms, his voice low and steady as he asked if Noah had eaten yet, as if that was the only detail that mattered. Claire gave a small nod, her posture unchanged, her calm uninterrupted, and the familiarity between them, the ease, the lack of performance, landed heavier than anything that had been said before. Ethan straightened slightly, his gaze shifting between Adrian and Claire, trying to place something that did not fit into the version of the story he had built in his head, because this was not just a visitor, not just someone passing through. This was someone who belonged, not loudly, not possessively, but in a way that was steady and unquestioned. Adrian stepped inside without hesitation, setting the bag gently on the counter, his movements precise, unhurried, completely at ease in a space Ethan no longer recognized as his. And that quiet certainty was what made it undeniable. Vanessa's eyes narrowed, her attention snapping toward Adrian as she asked who he was. Her voice edged again with that sharp need to regain control, but Adrian did not rush to answer her. He glanced at Claire first, a silent check, and Claire did not intervene. She did not introduce, she did not explain, because she did not need to. And after a brief pause, Adrian simply said his name, nothing more, no titles, no claims, just a presence that spoke for itself. Ethan watched the exchange closely, something tightening again in his chest, not from anger, but from recognition, because the way Adrian stood beside Claire was not uncertain, not temporary. It was grounded, as if he had learned the rhythm of this life step by step. The late nights, the early mornings, the quiet responsibilities that Ethan had never stayed long enough to see. Vanessa let out a short, incredulous laugh, asking if this was some kind of arrangement, trying to reduce the moment into something she could dismiss. But her voice did not carry the same confidence it had before, because even she could feel that whatever this was, it was not fragile, it was not new in the way she wanted it to be. And Ethan remained silent, his gaze moving once more to the baby, then to Claire, then to Adrian. And in that sequence, something settled with a finality he could not avoid, because he was no longer looking at a life paused in his absence. He was looking at a life that had continued, grown, and quietly replaced him without needing to announce it. And for the first time since he stepped through that door, It became clear that he was not the one in control of how this moment would end. Claire shifted Noah slightly as he stirred, his small hand curling instinctively against her shoulder, and in that quiet movement, everything that needed to be said was already there, not in words, but in presence, in the life she held steady without asking anyone for permission to continue. Ethan stood frozen near the doorway, his gaze moving between the child, the woman he once called his wife, and the man who now stood comfortably within a space he no longer belonged to. And for the first time, there was no version of the moment he could reshape into something that favored him. No explanation that could return things to what they had been. Vanessa broke the silence with a sharp exhale, her voice tight as she reminded him they needed to leave, that they had places to be, people waiting, a future already planned. But even as she spoke, the certainty behind her words had thinned, because the picture she had believed in had just cracked in a way she could not smooth over. Ethan did not respond immediately, his hand still resting lightly against the doorframe, as if it were the only thing grounding him. And when he finally looked at Claire again, there was something quieter in his expression now, something stripped of pride, of control, of the illusion that he had walked away without consequence. But Claire did not step toward that moment. She did not soften it. She did not offer comfort or closure. She simply met his gaze for a brief second, calm and unwavering, before shifting her attention back to Noah, adjusting the blanket around him with gentle precision, as if that small act mattered more than anything else happening in the room. And that was what made it final, because her focus had already moved beyond him, beyond the past, beyond anything he could try to reclaim. Adrian stood nearby, not intervening, not asserting, just present in a way that did not need to be explained, his quiet steadiness filling the space where noise and tension had once tried to take control. Vanessa turned toward the hallway, her heels striking the floor with sharper steps now, and after a moment that felt longer than it was, Ethan followed, the invitation still unopened in her hand, its purpose already lost, and as he crossed the threshold, he hesitated for just a fraction of a second, as if something inside him wanted to turn back, to say something, to hold on to a version of the past that no longer existed. But the moment passed, because there was nothing left to claim. The door closed gently behind them, not with force, not with finality that needed to be announced, just a quiet, soft click, and inside, the apartment returned to its steady rhythm, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft breathing of a sleeping child, the warm light settling back into place. Claire moved toward the couch, lowering herself carefully, Noah resting peacefully in her arms, and for a moment, she simply sat there, not thinking about what had just happened, not replaying it, because it did not need to be revisited to be understood. Everything that mattered was already here, in the life she had built, in the calm she now carried without effort, and in that stillness, it became clear that she had not won by taking anything back. She had won by no longer needing to.